The silk choked me before the fire did. My husband, Thomas, smiled as he locked the cellar door, his mistress Clara, wearing my diamond ring at his side. As the smoke from the fabric warehouse rose, burning my lungs, I realized my entire life was a lie. I died in ash, wearing a cheap imitation. The scent of charred flesh and burning tulle was still trapped in my throat when I gasped, my eyes flying open. I wasn't in the damp, smoke-choked basement of the Miller Textile Warehouse on 4th Street. I was sitting in front of the tri-fold vanity mirror at Maison de Couture on 5th Avenue. The date on my phone screen read October 14th, 2024. Exactly 3 months before my wedding. Exactly 3 months before my murder. My hands trembled against the cold marble tabletop. I stared at my reflection. My skin was smooth, unblemished by the third-degree burns that had melted my face into a horrific mask of scar tissue. My hair was long, thick and brown, not singed to the scalp. Beside me stood Clara, my maid of honor and childhood best friend, her fingers smoothing down the train of the gown I was wearing. It was a custom Vera Wang masterpiece, a structural silk gazar ball gown with a sweetheart neckline and an intricate hand-woven ivory lace overlay. It cost $85,000, paid for entirely by my late father's estate. "Oh, Vivian," Clara breathed, her voice dripping with a sweet, sickly affection that made my stomach turn violently. "It's absolutely breathtaking. You look like a queen. Honestly, it's almost a shame that it's only for one day. A masterpiece like this deserves to be seen by the whole world, over and over again." In my past life I had smiled, touched her cheek, and told her she could borrow anything of mine whenever she wanted. I had been so blind. I hadn't noticed the way her eyes lingered on the diamond band on my left hand, the heirloom ring Thomas had given me, which I later found out he had stolen from my mother's jewelry box while I was asleep. I hadn't noticed how she subtly shifted her body to look at her own reflection next to mine, imagining herself as the bride. I didn't notice until it was too late. I didn't notice when Thomas suggested we move all my family's liquid assets into a joint account for tax purposes. I didn't notice when he convinced me to sign over the deed of the 4th Street warehouse to his shell company, Aegis Holdings. And I certainly didn't notice the smell of kerosene until Thomas locked the heavy iron door from the outside, his hand clasped firmly in Clara's. I remembered the sound of their laughter echoing over the roar of the flames, Clara shouting through the grate, "Thanks for the dress, Vivian. It fits me better anyway." They had altered my wedding dress, the real one, so Clara could marry Thomas 3 weeks after my funeral. They ruled my death an accidental electrical fire. They inherited everything. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. The rage that surged through my veins was ice cold, a sharp, metallic taste in the back of my mouth. I forced my breathing to slow down, inhaling the clean, expensive scent of the bridal boutique's lavender air freshener instead of the phantom smell of my own burning skin. "You really think so, Clara?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly steady. I turned my head slightly, looking at her through the mirror. "Of course," Clara said, her eyes gleaming with an envy she could barely conceal. "If I ever find a man like Thomas, I'd want to dress exactly like this. But then men like Thomas don't grow on trees, do they?" "No," I replied, a small razor-sharp smile cutting across my face. "They certainly don't." Thomas walked into the boutique right then, right on cue. He looked exactly as he had before he became my executioner, tall, meticulously groomed in a tailored charcoal suit with a crooked, boyish smile that had once made my heart melt. Now, looking at him, I only saw the monster who had watched me burn through a pane of glass. "Am I allowed to see the bride before the big day?" Thomas chimed, his voice smooth as silk. He walked up behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders. His fingers felt like freezing iron through the fabric of the gown. I had to fight the visceral urge to plunge the seamstress's shears into his throat. "Thomas, you're not supposed to be here," Clara squealed, but she didn't step back. In fact, her shoulder brushed against his arm, a lingering, deliberate touch that lasted a fraction of a second too long. "I couldn't help myself," Thomas said, his eyes meeting Clara's in the mirror for a brief, silent heartbeat before locking onto mine. "Vivian, you look expensive. Not beautiful. Expensive." He was already calculating the net worth standing in front of him. "Thank you, darling," I said, leaning back into his touch, playing the part of the infatuated fool. I was just telling Clara how much I love this dress. But actually, I'm starting to have second thoughts about the lace. It feels a bit too traditional for the venue. Clara's eyes lit up instantly. "Second thoughts? But Vivian, it's perfect." "It is perfect," I murmured, stepping out of the gown with the help of the assistant. "But maybe it's perfect for someone else. I think I want something completely redesigned. Something unforgettable." I watched Clara's gaze fixate on the Vera Wang gown as the assistant hung it back on the rolling rack. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She wanted it. She wanted my life, my money, my husband, and my dress. And I was going to let her have every single piece of it, right until the trap snapped shut. That evening, I sat in the study of my penthouse apartment on Park Avenue. Thomas was out, supposedly at a late-night client dinner at Le Bernardin. In my past life, I had called the restaurant to surprise him with a bottle of champagne, only to be told no reservation existed under his name. I had accepted his excuse of a last-minute location change without a second thought. This time, I didn't bother calling. I knew he was at Clara's apartment on 22nd Street. Instead, I pulled up my laptop and logged into my personal banking portal. I had inherited $12 million from my father, alongside a sprawling real estate portfolio. In my previous life, by December, Thomas had convinced me to appoint him as the chief financial officer of the estate. I opened a secure encrypted browser and contacted Arthur Pendleton, my father's loyal retired corporate attorney. He was the only person Thomas hadn't been able to manipulate, which was why Thomas had eventually convinced me to fire him a month before the wedding. When Arthur answered the phone, his voice was gruff but familiar. "Vivian, it's late. Is everything all right?" "Arthur," I said, my voice cracking slightly with genuine emotion. "I need your help. The execution of a perfect trap requires absolute stillness from the predator." For the next 2 weeks, I played the doting, blissfully ignorant fiancé. I let Thomas hold my hand. I let him kiss my cheek, though every contact made my skin crawl with the phantom memory of blistering heat. On October 28th, I invited Clara over to the penthouse for drinks. I had deliberately left a bottle of Chateau Margaux on the counter, alongside a folder labeled Confidential, Maison de Couture, Final Dress Specs. I excused myself to take a shower, knowing exactly what Clara would do the moment the bathroom door clicked shut. I stood in the bathroom, counting the seconds. 120. 200. Plenty of time for her to open the folder and look at the photos. Inside that folder were sketches of the altered Vera Wang dress. I had instructed the designer, a brilliant young woman named Genevieve, who owed her career to my father's early investments, to make a few secret modifications. The dress was to be fitted exactly to Clara's measurements, not mine. I had spent the last 2 weeks subtly pretending to lose weight, complaining that the dress was swallowing me alive, and that I didn't have the heart to change it again. When I stepped out of the bathroom, wiping my hair with a towel, Clara was sitting on the sofa, her phone held tightly in her hand. Her face was flushed, her breathing slightly shallow. "Everything all right, Clara?" I asked, pouring myself a glass of water. "Oh, yes, totally," she stammered, quickly sliding her phone into her Chanel purse. "Just checking some work emails. Hey, Vivian, I was thinking about what you said the other day, about the dress. If you're really unhappy with the Vera Wang, you shouldn't force yourself to wear it. It's your special day." "I know," I seated heavily, sitting down across from her. "But the boutique said it's non-refundable. $85,000 down the drain. Thomas would be furious if he knew I just wasted that kind of money." "Well," Clara leaned forward, her eyes wide with a predatory hunger disguised as helpfulness. "What if someone bought it from you, privately, like an anonymous buyer? Or what if you kept it in the collection but let someone else use it for an event? Or what if I took it off your hands? Obviously, I can't afford $85,000 right now, but we could make a deal. I could pay you back over time." I looked at her, watching the desperate ambition claw at her throat. She didn't want to wait for her own wedding. She wanted to wear my dress, to feel the luxury of it, to prove to herself that she could occupy my space. "Clara, you'd do that for me?" I gasped, putting a hand over my heart. "You're such an amazing friend. But what would people say if you wore my wedding dress?" "Oh, who cares about superstitions?" Clara laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "We can just say we bought it together as a shared piece. Besides, it's a shame to let it sit in a box." "You're right," I said softly. "Tell you what, I'll have Genevieve transfer the fitting appointments to your name. You can have the dress. Consider it an early gift." "Thank you, Vivian," she cried, throwing her arms around me. The smell of her expensive, heavy perfume, the exact same scent I had smelled on Thomas's collar the night I died, filled my nose. I smiled into her shoulder, my eyes wet and dead. The next step was Thomas. On November the 5th, I met Thomas at the 4th Street warehouse. It was a bleak, rainy afternoon. The brick building looked imposing against the grey sky. This was the place where, in another life, my bones had turned to ash. Walking through the heavy iron doors sent a shiver of pure, unadulterated terror down my spine. But I forced my feet to move. I clenched my fists inside my coat pockets until my nails bit into my palms. Thomas was waiting inside, talking to a contractor. The warehouse was empty, filled with the echo of dripping water and the musty smell of old wood. "Vivian, over here," Thomas called out, waving me over. "The contractor says the electrical grid in this place is completely shot. It's going to cost a fortune to bring it up to code before we can lease it out to the new logistics firm." "A fortune?" I asked, walking over to him. I looked up at the ceiling, at the exposed wires that he would later claim had sparked the accidental fire. "That's terrible, honey." "Yeah. Honestly, it might be better if we sell the property to Aegis Holdings," Thomas suggested, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial murmur. He reached out, rubbing my arm. "My shell company can absorb the renovation costs as a tax write-off, and then we can split the profits through our joint estate. It protects your personal name from any liability if there's an accident or a code violation." There it was, The exact phrase he had used before. If there's an accident. That sounds incredibly smart, Thomas, I said, looking directly into his eyes. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He was a sociopath, completely devoid of empathy. But you know how sentimental I am about this place. My father bought it when he started his first shipping line. I know, sweetie. But sentimentality doesn't pay the property taxes, he urged, his palms sweating slightly as he adjusted his collar. He was getting anxious. He needed the deed in his name to secure the multi-million-dollar loan he was planning to use to flee the country with Clara after my untimely demise. Tell you what, I said, pulling a document from my leather tote bag. I had Arthur draft the transfer paperwork, but because of the estate structure, we have to sign the prenuptial agreement at the same time to ensure the asset transfer links properly to our marital protections. It's just a formality. I handed him the thick stack of papers. I watched his fingers flip through the pages. He glanced at the first few pages, the ones detailing the lavish lifestyle allowances, the properties he would have access to, the beautiful gilded cage I had constructed for him. His eyes skipped right over the legal jargon on page 14, the tiny, dense paragraph titled Section 9.2, Forfeiture under Marital Infidelity and Malfeasance. This looks standard, Thomas said, a smug smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He pulled a Mont Blanc pen from his pocket, another gift from me, and signed his name with a flourish. Thomas Miller. Perfect, I whispered, taking the papers back and sliding them into my bag. The transition from November to December was a blur of silver bells, white roses, and toxic smiles. New York was freezing, the air biting and sharp, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the absolute zero settling into my chest. Every morning, I woke up next to Thomas, watched his chest rise and fall, and reminded myself that the man sharing my bed was a ghost who hadn't realized he was dead yet. On December 12th, I initiated the first phase of the mirror justice strategy. In my past life, Thomas had slowly starved my reputation, whispering to my friends and business associates that I was becoming paranoid, erratic, and financially reckless. By the time I died, the social registry looked at me with pity, completely prepared to believe I had tragically burned myself alive in a fit of unstable hysteria. This time, the whispers belonged to me. I arranged a private luncheon at Le Bernardin, inviting 4 of the most influential women in our social circle, including Eleanor Vance, a woman whose tongue was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel and whose gossip column set the tone for the entire Upper East Side. I had deliberately invited Clara as well, ensuring she sat directly across from Eleanor. You look a bit flushed, Clara, I noted casually, sipping my sparkling water. Are you feeling all right? I know the logistics for the charity gala have been stressful. Oh, I'm fine, Vivian, Clara said, smoothing down her designer blouse, but her fingers were twitching. Over the last week, I had Harrison anonymously leak a series of minor, conflicting financial reports to the boutique investment firm where Clara worked. Her clients were panicking, and her boss was breathing down her neck. She was losing sleep, and it was showing through her heavy concealer. Actually, I said, leaning in closer to the table, my voice dropping to a confidential murmur, I'm a bit worried about Thomas. He's been working so hard on this new acquisition through Aegis Holdings. He's been so stressed, he's started moving money around. Large sums, millions, from his own personal accounts. I caught him sweating over spreadsheets at 3 a.m, mumbling about liquidation. Eleanor's ears practically perked up like a hound on a scent. Liquidation? Really, Vivian? I thought the Miller family was perfectly stable. Oh, they are, I said quickly, playing the protective, anxious fiancé perfectly. But Thomas is so ambitious. He wants to prove himself. I just hope he hasn't gotten himself into trouble with those offshore ventures. You know how dangerous those can be if the authorities start auditing. Clara froze, her fork hovering inches from her plate. I saw the exact moment the color drained from her lips. She knew about Aegis Holdings. She knew about the multi-million-dollar loan Thomas was trying to secure using my warehouse as collateral. What she didn't know was that 3 days ago, using the power of attorney Thomas had so eagerly signed over to the trust, I had legally frozen the warehouse's title due to an ongoing structural integrity audit. The loan was dead in the water. Thomas just hadn't received the rejection letter from the bank yet. I'm sure Thomas knows exactly what he's doing, Clara stammered, her voice thin and reedy. She took a large gulp of her wine, her hand shaking so badly the crystal clinked against her teeth. Of course he does, I smiled, my eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying neutrality. He's a very clever man. The real trap snapped shut on December the 28th, the night of the annual Miller Winter Gala at the Plaza Hotel. It was the premier event of the season, attended by the city's elite, the press, and every major investor in the tri-state area. Thomas was in his element, wearing a custom tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne, basking in the reflected glow of my family's prestige. He thought he was weeks away from the ultimate payout. He had no idea that Harrison had spent the afternoon delivering a very specific legal packet to the compliance department of the Securities and Exchange Commission, detailing Thomas's attempt to use fraudulent estate assets to back his corporate loans. During the cocktail hour, I slipped away to the grand ballroom's private green room. I had told Thomas I needed to adjust my makeup. Instead, I waited. 5 minutes later, the door clicked open. It was Clara. She was wearing a stunning, blood-red silk gown, but her face was frantic. She closed the door behind her and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place sent a thrill of dark satisfaction through my veins. "Vivian," she hissed, walking toward me. "We have a problem. Thomas is losing his mind. He just got a text from his broker. The Aegis loan was denied. They're saying the warehouse title is tied up in a legal trust. Did you do something? Did Arthur alter the papers?" I didn't turn around from the vanity mirror. I picked up a lipstick tube, carefully applying a layer of deep crimson red. "Vivian, answer me," Clara demanded, stepping closer, her voice cracking with an ugly, desperate rage. The polished facade of the loyal best friend was completely gone, replaced by the vicious thief she truly was. "We need that capital. If that loan doesn't go through, the contractors will pull out, and the whole project collapses." "Why do you need that capital, Clara?" I asked softly, blotching my lips with a tissue. I turned around slowly, crossing my legs. I looked at her with a calm that clearly terrified her. "The warehouse belongs to my family. Aegis is Thomas's company. Why are you sweating so much over his balance sheets?" Clara blinked, her chest heaving. She realized she had overstepped, her arrogance blinding her to how much she was revealing. I just care about your financial future, Vivian, as your maid of honor. As your friend." "A friend?" I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air like poison. "A friend who spends every Tuesday night at the 22nd Street apartment with my fiancé. A friend who likes to drink Chateau Margaux while discussing how beautiful she'll look in my wedding dress after I'm gone." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the distant, muffled bass of the orchestra playing in the grand ballroom. Clara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. A bead of sweat broke out along her hairline, ruining her perfect makeup. She staggered back a step, her heels clicking weakly against the hardwood floor. What are you talking about?" she whispered, her hands trembling so violently she had to clutch her purse to her stomach. "Vivian, you're insane. You're having a breakdown." "I would never. Thomas loves you." "I have the audio, Clara," I said, my voice cold, flat, and brutal. The morning of January 14th, 2025, my original date of death, dawned grey, crisp, and heavy with anticipation. The wedding ceremony at St. Bartholomew's Church was an exhibition of pure architectural decadence. White orchids and towering delphiniums lined the aisles. 500 guests filled the pews, diamonds glittering under the stained glass windows. In the bridal suite, Clara stood before the full-length mirror, radiating an arrogant triumph she could no longer suppress. I had executed my first major twist. I wasn't the one wearing the Vera Wang gown. I had formally cancelled my own walk down the aisle 48 hours prior, citing a sudden legal development to the venue. But I kept the guests, the press, and Thomas entirely in the dark. I had told Thomas that to honour my father's memory, I wanted Clara to model the custom gown for a special pre-ceremony solo portrait session inside the chapel sanctuary to surprise the media. Clara smoothed her hands over the ivory lace overlay. It hugged her frame flawlessly. She looked at her reflection, her lips curved into a smug, victorious smile. She thought she had already won. She thought she was stepping directly into my life. Then her hand brushed against her rib cage. Her fingers caught on a small, stiff protrusion, hidden completely within the inner lining of the silk gazar bodice, right beneath her heart. Her brow furrowed. She pulled at the seam, expecting a stray tag or a stray piece of bone casing. Instead, her fingers snagged a thick, bright red silk thread. She tugged at it, and a concealed piece of heavy parchment, stitched deep inside the layers of fabric, partially pulled through the lining. Clara leaned close to the mirror, her breath fogging the glass as she unpicked the red thread with her manicured nails. She smoothed out the folded note. Written on it, in my sharp, unmistakable handwriting, were 42 words. To the woman who wore my dress and watched me burn. I remembered the cellar door on 4th Street. I remembered the smell of the kerosene. Enjoy the fit of the gown, Clara. It will be the last beautiful thing you ever wear. Clara gasped, a sharp, choked sound cutting off in her throat. Her face turned a horrific ash-grey colour. She staggered backward, hitting the vanity table, knocking over a crystal vase of orchids that shattered loudly against the marble floor. Water pooled around her satin shoes. Her chest heaved, her eyes darting around the empty room in absolute, paralyzing panic. "No," she whispered, her hands shaking so violently the paper fluttered to the floor. "No, no, no." Before she could reach for the zipper to tear the dress off her body, the heavy oak doors of the bridal suite swung open. It wasn't me. It was Harrison, flanked by 2 uniformed officers from the New York Police Department and an investigator from the district attorney's office. "Clara Evans," the investigator stated, his voice booming in the quiet room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, and wire fraud. Please step away from the vanity." "What? No, there's a mistake!" Clara shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls. She tried to move, but the heavy structural gazar train of the gown caught on the shattered glass of the vase, pinning her in place. Vivian did this. She's setting me up." As the officers stepped forward, clicking the cold steel handcuffs around her wrists. The second major twist was already unfolding in the main sanctuary. Thomas was standing at the altar, adjusting his bow tie, adjusting his posture for the cameras. He was looking down the aisle, waiting for me to appear. The double doors at the back of the church swung open. But it wasn't a bride walking down the carpet. It was Arthur Pendleton, accompanied by the managing director of the New York branch of the SEC and 3 federal marshals. The music from the pipe organ died instantly, screeching to a halt. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the 500 wealthy guests. Arthur walked deliberately down the center aisle, his cane clicking rhythmically against the stone floor. He stopped right at the base of the altar, looking up at Thomas, whose boyish smile had completely frozen into a mask of pure confusion. "Thomas Miller," Arthur announced, his voice carrying clearly to the very back pews. "I am here on behalf of the Vivian Miller Estate Trust. As of 9 a.m. this morning, all joint ventures, bank accounts, and asset agreements under your name have been permanently dissolved due to a violation of Section 9.2 of your signed prenuptial agreement." Thomas's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He stepped down from the altar, his fists clenching at his sides. "What the hell is the meaning of this, Arthur? Where is Vivian? This is a joke." "The federal marshals behind me are not a joke, Mr. Miller," Arthur replied calmly, handing him a thick legal document. "You are being served with a federal indictment for securities fraud, bank fraud, and the attempted illegal liquidation of a protected estate asset, specifically the 4th Street Textile Warehouse. Furthermore, a forensic investigation into your shell company, Aegis Holdings, has revealed systematic embezzlement of $3 million from your previous investors." Thomas dropped the papers, his palms sweating so heavily the sheets slipped right through his fingers and scattered across the altar steps. He looked around the church, his eyes wet and wustang, searching the crowd of his peers, his investors, the people whose respect he had spent a lifetime fabricating. Every single one of them was staring back at him with disgust, their whispers rising like a swarm of hornets. "Where is she?" Thomas roared, his voice cracking as a marshal stepped up the stairs, grabbing his arm. "Vivian, you can't do this to me. I built this. We had an agreement." "Your agreement was with a woman you thought you could kill, Thomas," Arthur said softly, turning his back on him. I stood in the shadows of the choir loft, looking down at the spectacle. I watched the marshals lead Thomas away in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpling, his dignity completely stripped bare before the world. I watched Clara being escorted through the side exit, sobbing hysterically, her $85,000 wedding dress stained with dirty water and crushed flowers. They had wanted my wealth, my life, and my body turned to ash. Instead, they had systematically dismantled themselves, guided entirely by their own insatiable greed and arrogance. I hadn't needed to lift a finger against them physically. I simply let them walk down the path they had carved for me, right off the edge of the cliff. I looked down at my hands. They were smooth. They were steady. The phantom scent of smoke was completely gone, replaced by the clean, crisp winter air flowing through the open doors of the church. I was alive. I was 26 years old. My father's legacy was secure, and my life was entirely my own. I turned away from the balcony and walked down the back stairs, stepping out onto Fifth Avenue. The sun was bright, blindingly beautiful against the snow-covered pavement. I didn't look back. I wore the ashes of their betrayal until I turned them into my armor. If you felt the cold weight of justice in your veins today, hit that like button right now. Share this story with someone who needs to know that a second chance is always worth fighting for, and subscribe to follow me into my next rebirth, because some debts can only be settled across lifetimes.